Yeah, so I certainly appreciate you being here. This is season 6 and episode number 5 of season 6. And those of you who are long-term Slang of Ages podcast listeners will recognize the voice on this podcast. This is Joe Williams. Joe has been in at least 3 other seasons of a Slang of Ages podcast. We talked about some of our favorite albums. We talked about some of our favorite concerts. Joe is a repeated contributor, a great friend, an artist in his own right, actor, a writer, published author, and kind of the bane of my existence because he's gone to so many concerts with me, made me endure so many bad concerts like Polyphonic Spree, and I don't know.
Don't you lie. You like that one.
That was okay. Actually, I think the only concert I didn't like was the one with the band with the spaceship. I'm not talking about Parliament Funkadelic. I'm talking about the white band with the spaceship.
See, who would that be? The Flaming Lips?
Flaming Lips. God damn, it was horrible.
They put on a great show. They have a
Oh,
guy in a bubble who goes across the audience.
oh
They don't
yeah.
even have to play music. I would totally just go for that.
I really felt like a hippie in that concert, and I couldn't wait to get out. But Joe, before we get started, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing good. I'm in my summer break from teaching, so I am all ready and had time to read your book, which is excellent.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, this podcast, we're going to talk about the book, which is called Toto, the Band, Not the Dog, which comes out, well, when this podcast comes out, the book will be out on all digital platforms. I'm urging everyone to read it and then share it with a friend as well. But Joe, before we dig in deep in this book, anything you want to talk about?
No, I think I want to dive right into the book because I have a lot of penetrating questions for you.
Well, I like to be penetrated. So yeah, let's get started.
Yes, I gave you a softball double entendre, so you're welcome.
Okay, I need to edit all
Okay,
this out.
yeah. So clearly, the book is about the band Toto and not the dog, which I am writing a book about the dog Toto. So luckily, you did not steal my thunder. Exhaustive research has found like 3 sentences so far, but I think there'll be more. But there's a lot more about the band Toto. And so, first of all, why did you choose to write a book on this particular band?
Oh, wow. Okay, so my fandom goes back to the early 80s when I was in college. And my first roommate was a drummer. My roommate Tim was a drummer, and he loved Jeff Porcaro, who was the original Toto drummer. And I really didn't have a high opinion of Toto, quite frankly. I thought they were just a bunch of LA guys who played kind of commercial music. But the more and more I got into it, the more I liked it. Now, that was the period. I'm old, so I can't remember when I was in college. That was a period after Toto 4, which was their biggest album. I think it was around Isolation or so. And then when Isolation came out, which was their 5th album, the first one with a new singer who passed away a few years ago, I liked that album. I thought it was a great hard rock album, and everyone else hated that album, but I loved it. So I became more and more of a fan. And as you know, Joe, I'm a huge Steely Dan fan. So is my dog. I'm a huge Steely Dan fan, and Jeff Porcaro, the drummer of Toto, played with Steely Dan on a number of great songs. So I got more and more into it, and eventually got the whole catalog. You didn't ask this, but I never thought all these years later, because we're now 2020 something, 24. I still be a fan because the band has changed so much. But that's really my how I got started. And my love for the band continued to grow and grow.
It's interesting you got involved with the band, around the time of their biggest album, which is obviously Toto 4 in terms of number of, hits, and also, kind of a change in sound for their follow-up band, Isolation, or follow-up album, Isolation. And so, which wasn't as popular, although had a number of great songs. Which, of course, my beloved "Stranger in Town" was. I had to get an early reference of that into the podcast. So, what do you think of their decision to try to change the sound up for something that was extremely popular? Would have been very easy to do like a Toto 5 that kind of built upon that sound and going in a totally, or slightly different, artistic direction.
Well, that's a good question. Joe, I would say that Toto did do three albums, which are kind of sister albums of Toto 4. And that would be, God, now I can't remember. Fahrenheit, which came out in 86, the seventh one, which came out in 88, and then Toto 14, which was kind of a take on Toto 4, which was their last true studio album, which came out in 2015. That being said, I thought it was a brave choice for them to do Isolation. Now, I don't talk much about the personalities of Toto. I don't go into any of the lawsuits involving Jeff Porcaro's wife. I don't talk about the issues they've had with their management about the name. I don't dwell too long on the song, Africa, which is has a billion streams, I believe, or more than a billion streams now. But the fact is that the band always followed their muse in terms of their music. So they weren't given much pressure initially to have another album like Toto 4. But they, quite frankly, they couldn't have had another album like Toto 4 right away because their lead singer, Bobby Kimball, was kicked out of the band after Toto 4 tour. He had some drug problems, and he also had some vocal problems on the road. Also, they had changed bass players. David Hungate, the original Toto bass player for the first four albums, had left the band unknown to the band. He had moved from LA where the band played and recorded to Nashville, didn't tell anybody till the last day of recording. And the last day of recording on the last song, which was Africa, which was the last song they recorded, he took his bass, threw it up against the wall, and he left. And he never came back he never came back as a full member. So the band was changing anyway. They couldn't do another Toto 4 quite the same way it was. And they wanted a more hard rock sound. So they hired a singer who worked in a hard rock band. The guy was really good looking, had blonde hair, could really hit those high notes. And he thought, hey, this is the way forward. This is the way a lot of bands are going. We have our kind of Steve Perry guy with blonde hair. He'll lead us to the future. And of course, I think it's Fergie Fredrickson. He lasted one album before he was kicked out for vocal problems. So they really couldn't do another Toto 4. And I'm glad they didn't because Isolation is a strong album. You talked about Stranger in Town. That was a minor hit, but it's a great song. But the problem with Toto had was that the music world was changing. Uh, we saw punk coming in. Well, punk was there already, and then we saw new wave, and then we saw bands like Nirvana and bands of that ilk become really famous with really less production. And Toto was a well-produced, well-oiled machine. The other issue is Toto had two keyboardists, and it did a lot of things with synthesizers. And Steve Porcaro talks about this in the book. And that whole thing had really changed. Grunge was in, and Toto wasn't going to go grunge. So the band continued to change, but they weren't going to change that much. And their popularity suffered. The record company didn't like where they were going, and they lost support from the record company.
Yeah. Now you're wearing the T-shirt that says "petty," but I'm going to take that as an invitation for me to be petty for 1 minute or two. In your chapter on Isolation, where you list your favorite song from the album, I feel betrayed that you have not chosen "Stranger in Town" as your favorite song from that album. You chose "Lion" instead. So I will give you 30 seconds to apologize to your masses of why you are wrong about that.
I love Stranger in Town. And one of the great things about Toto recently is they were added back to the set a few years ago. Did it in a different key because Joe Williams Joseph Williams, their lead singer, can't sing quite as high as Bob.
Not me, by the way.
Not you, Joseph Williams. But they did add Lion into the set. Stranger in Town they add to their set a few times since they reconstituted the band. Stranger, the reason I chose Lion over Stranger in Town quickly. Lion was one of the songs I wrote right after Toto 4. And David Page wrote that with Bobby Kimball, their then lead singer. And Kimball did some vocals on that song, but he was kicked out before Toto Isolation came out. Stranger in Town was a composition by David Page and Jeff Porcaro. Great driving groove, great synth line. It's a little bit more simple. And the record company thought that would be a hit because David Page sang it and it sounded kind of like Africa vocally, but it's nothing like Africa. I love Stranger in Town. It's one of my favorite songs, but Lion with that guitar part, the drums, and the little synth break is fantastic. It's one of my favorite Toto songs, period. So there you go.
And again, I'm not from Toto. If he wants to send his royalty checks to me, I am more than willing to take those.
Ah. And they'll send you the lawsuits too.
Yeah. Well, we would look forward to that. And so at each chapter, you do give your favorite, song from each, album, but you don't give your overall favorite album in the book or like your overall favorite song. And so, was that a conscious decision not to do that?
Yes. I have no fucking idea what my favorite Toto song is. That is really, that's almost impossible. Now, in all fairness to you, Joe, when I do interviews of other artists, I know I asked Steve Porcaro this, I asked Steve Lukather this, David Page this. I always ask artists what are their top 5 albums. And invariably, artists will say, I can't give you 5. And I say, yeah, well, you have to, because I asked. And most do. I had one artist, a guitarist, I'll mention his name, Vinny Zumo, who was a guitarist for Joe Jackson. He sent me a list of 100 different albums that he loved. So he didn't follow the rules, but usually I ask him beforehand what their 5 favorite albums are. For Toto, my favorite Toto album is the 7th one. And that is their second album with Joseph Williams that came out in 1988. It had the song Pamela in it. It had Stop Loving You. It wasn't a huge hit in America, though it was a hit everywhere else. That would be my favorite album. My favorite song, that's hard. I would say my favorite song by Toto as of right now is Taking It Back by Steve Porcaro, which is from their first album, which is a song that Steve Porcaro sang, in which most Toto fans love as a deep cut. It was not a hit. It was a B-side in Europe. I don't think it was a B-side in America. That's my favorite song because the vocals are great by Steve Porcaro. The guitar part's great. The orchestration, the horns, the drums. So if we talk tomorrow, if you ask me the same question, I may give you a different answer, but that's my favorite. And that's kind of weird because I'm going back to the first album in 1978. Their last album of new material, if you can call it new material, was Old is New, which came out in the box set in 2018. It had 10 songs of, I think it's 10 songs, 10 or 11 songs of material they not used before or reinvented, and did some additional recordings on. And that also had 4 fantastic songs, 2 of which were written by Steve Porcaro. So there you go. That's my commitment for today.
Okay. And just to let you know, I will not be calling you tomorrow to see your favorite song. I figure once a year for my next podcast appearance is all I can muster for you.
Oh, thank you for that, Joe. I appreciate it.
Now, the book is called Toto the Band, not the dog. And so I love the title. So do you want to give us like your inspiration behind the title?
Well, there are other books about Toto. There's some really good books about, well, there's a great book by Steve Lukather about his musical life. He talks about Michael Jackson working with Earth, Wind, and Fire, working with the Jacksons, and of course Toto. There are probably two other great books about Toto. This book really is a fan love letter from me to the band. So I wanted a catchy title. I couldn't come up with one. And I believe we were in New York in 2023. We were seeing some theater in New York, and we were talking. You and I were talking about the book, and you mentioned the title. So I know I have to give you credit for the title. I'm not sure when you mentioned it, but I think that was when it was.
Yeah, and I will say there wasn't just a gratuitous attempt to try to get credit for something. I think I had forgotten I even said that. I say so much random shit that I forget what I said. You could have pretended that I never said it, and I would
You
have
didn't
said,
know that you gave him
sure,
the title?
I didn't remember. And I'm glad I did. I'm glad I inspired you.
Okay, I have another admission. I have a whole list of Joe Williams quotes, which I occasionally use in my writing or in a book or in conversation. So, my next book, I'll use another bunch of Joe Williams things.
Well, I'm going to have to start recording all my conversations so I can go back and sue you for.
Yeah, that's it.
but, but it helps your anecdotes make it into my writing as well. So there's so
Uh,
much rich material there.
we'll send the check.
Yes. Okay. And so one thing I always kind of wondered was why is Toto not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? They seem like they have the hits, the longevity, the respect of many of their peers, but
Yeah.
never seem to make it into the Hall of Fame. What are your thoughts on that?
Because it's the Hall of Fame's all about politics and sales. And Toto had this downturn really after isolation, where they weren't selling many albums in America. They were selling overseas, but not in America. And they weren't really booking many concerts. In fact, I think their concert comeback in America didn't happen until probably 2014. And I think I saw them with you at Ravinia. Maybe I went by myself. And then we saw them again in 2015 on the tour they did with Yes after Chris Squire died. But the point is they weren't really making new music, which most people would know. Most people only know Africa and they kind of stop there. They may know Strangers in Town, but most of us after Africa, they don't know Toto. Now the fans have been pretty rabid about Toto. Toto fans are Toto fans, and especially in America, we really love the resurgence of the band. Another thing is leadership, management. A lot of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductees have some really powerful industry people behind them. I mean, a good example is people like the Doobie Brothers. Doobie Brothers weren't even considered getting into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame until they got Irving Azoff as their management and they fired Bruce Cohen. Once they got Irving Azoff, they were selling out shows, they were on television all the time, and they got in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame on the first ballot. So I think it's really the politics of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Another piece is that, especially when grunge was really popular, a lot of people look down on musicians who could actually write good songs and play their own instruments. It's not auto tune, it wasn't fixed by the computer. They play their instruments. And they didn't really jump on the whole bandwagon of what was going on today. They were true to their own music. And that's not what's popular now. What you hear on the radio now, what you hear on YouTube is all contrived, it's all to a click track, it's all auto-tuned, and most of it is fake. It's not real music, but that's what's selling now, and that's what's getting streams. I'm not sure it's selling. That's what's getting streams. And Toto isn't that way. They're real musicians who can play. Even now, with the key members of Steve Lukather and Joseph Williams and David Page, those are musicians who are still active in the music industry who actually play their own instruments and still write. So that's my feel for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I don't know if they'll ever make it in. Who knows? But I'm not surprised they're not in.
Yeah, well, it's deserved that they will be in there, and hopefully they will someday. I was hoping that, after the brief kind of rise in popularity after Weezer's cover of Africa, that it would get them in the conversation a little bit in terms of maybe some younger generation artists speaking out. similar to what happened with Kiss and getting them into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So there is still hope for that, hopefully. Now I know in your book it has a track by track listing of or a critique of each of the songs on all their albums, and which I think is like a good and novel approach. You're shaking your head. It
Not
should be
all
a
their albums.
yeah,
Not all their albums.
for most of their albums.
Most of their albums.
Yes. And so, which is a different approach though. So you take it, less of a tabloid approach and definitely more of a, musicianship approach. That is, what went into the craft of making a song, the players on the song, and also some of the inspiration in the those songs. And as I think you said at the top of the interview, you purposely steer away from a lot of the more personal or more tabloid oriented fare.
Yeah.
Can you go into like your thinking of why did you take this type of approach versus perhaps like something that would get like more mainstream attention?
That's easy. I'm an old fuck. I mean, people now, they want the sensational stuff. The kids want to know about the who beat who got in a fight with who got kicked out of the band, who got divorced, who got sued. I don't care about that. I mean, for me, I care about the music. And I wrote it really for me. And I think most people will like it. And if you're a fan of the band, you're going to like it. You might find something in there that you didn't know, even though you're a fan of the band. But I don't like writing like that. And even when I started writing for Something Else Reviews and slingofages.com, which has been, I guess, God, it's been probably 13, 14 years now. I've been writing for a blog. I don't steer into the personal. I don't care about who's dating who. People care about that. And if you want to find that, you can find that on your own, but I'm not going to write about it. I really want to write about the music. Um, and I wondered about, and I also, and this is something our friend Peter in Chicago asked a while ago when he asked me why didn't I review Beyonce albums? And my answer was because I don't care about Beyonce. I mean, there are millions of other people who care about Beyonce. There are hundreds of other people who will write about Beyonce. I don't care. So why should I write about something I don't particularly care about or don't like? If I don't like something, I will very rarely write about it because it's not worth. I'm too fucking old. It's not worth my time. So there's your answer.
I definitely
Can I
appreciate
say
the
fuck on this
approach.
podcast?
No, you fucking cannot. That is against the rules of the podcast.
Yeah, I thought it was. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Actually, we all know it's your own podcast, so you can say whatever you want and edit it out, or just repeat me saying fuck on a loop for 100 times and make me look like a potty mouth.
This
Show
is
it to
good
my
listening.
mom,
Yeah.
who will be disappointed in me. Yeah, but I actually appreciate the approach that you take because it's given me like a lot of insight into songs I've really liked and things that I didn't know that deepen the meaning of these songs. So I'm glad that it's an approach that you don't even see in Rolling Stone or other types of magazines, these days. So I think it is a very good approach. Now, clearly, you approach the book as both a fanboy and also a journalist. So how do you dissociate those two roles? That is, like, sometimes you might have to be critical of a song, and how do you separate that out from being a major fan and also interviewing and getting to know the band members a little bit through your interviews?
That's a good question. I don't love everything that Toto's done. There's some things I think, why? And I think I say that in a few of the reviews of some of the songs. But obviously, I love their music overall, and that really informs how I write about them. Uh, I try to be focused on some of the technical, but not too technical. And I've noticed that in some reviews I've done this year in 2024, I talk a lot about the technical in interviews I've done. And a lot of artists they love to talk about the technical. So I kind of figure people who don't want to hear that will fast forward through it. And people who do want to hear it will listen to it. With Toto, though, I really talk about the things that, like I said, that I really care about and love, and I want to touch on every era of their career. Now, I was shaking my head when you said that I talked about every album and every song. I purposely left off their live albums um, because they're live, and they're also, I think they're in the whole Toto catalog, there were 10 songs I did not talk about. And we could talk about that one other day, why I did not talk about those 10 songs. And if you're a Toto fan, you'll look through the book and you may notice, you may not notice which songs they are.
Oh, you can't leave your fans
Oh, I
hanging.
can't.
You just threw out a nugget of,
Yeah,
I refuse to talk about 10 of those songs,
10
but I
songs.
will not tell you why.
I won't tell
So,
you why, and buy the book.
yeah. Is the answer in the book why you didn't?
Kind of.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to have to reread that. So I must have missed that portion of it.
That's all right. Most people,
Yeah.
well, if you're a casual fan, you won't even notice.
Yeah.
If you're a fanatic like most people at Toto are, you might notice.
Yeah. Well, in addition to a lot of these songs that you go over, evidently not track by track by track, since there are 10, missing. But you also, supplement it with interviews you've done with the bands over the years. What are some of your more memorable moments of interviewing band members?
Okay, so hats off to Steve Porcaro, who was the original synthesizer player, keyboards with Toto, one of the founding members. Because I've interviewed Steve 4 times, most recently 2024. He's always extremely generous with his time. Um, I think the interview I included in the book, we talked a lot about his next solo work, which is yet to be released. He had one solo album out already, but I enjoy talking with him. He will go in the weeds about his songwriting, his singing, his synthesizer setup, and he will spend hours talking about that. So I have to edit all that down. I think in a book I included most of the last interview, but I didn't include the other three that I did with him. So there's so much I could have put in from him alone in the book. And he's always extremely great, generous with his time. I think in my dedication page, I mentioned his name, and also I mentioned Michael Sherwood. Michael Sherwood was the brother of Billy Sherwood, who's a bass player for Yes, was a guitarist in Yes in the early 90s. When Chris Squire died in 2015, he became bass player for Yes. But Michael, whose interview I did not include in the book, was also extremely generous with his time talking about working on Toto 14, writing, I think he wrote 2 songs on Toto 14, and also co-produced Steve Porcaro's first solo album. Uh, I talked to Steve Lukather, who is the guitarist of Toto, the last man standing of the band. He's been in every incarnation of the band. You have met, I think, yeah, you have met Steve Lukather, I believe. Maybe it was Jay Robinson. I don't know. Anyway,
I don't
um,
think it was me. I think I met Leland Sklar,
well, okay.
but I haven't
So
met Steve Lukather. Lukather.
Luke, is very animated, very direct, and he's a talker. So I enjoy talking with him, but interviewing him is very difficult because you ask one question and he will go on about a lot of different subjects for 30 minutes. So then you have to decide.
I know what that's like.
Thank you for that. So then you have to decide, do you cut him off? Do you cut Lukather off, who's wonderful, it's great material, or not? For a podcast and for a video, it's great. For writing, it's not as good. So I enjoy talking with Luke. He was very, very generous with his time. The other interview in the book was David Page, who was the founding member, keyboardist. He was the principal writer for the first 3 albums, and wonderful man. It's a great history. Still active in music. Doesn't tour with Toto anymore, but still involved with Toto. And it was a sheer pleasure to talk to him. And I've met him a bunch of times too, him and Lukather, a bunch of times, but my first time actually interviewing. What was the question?
Well, that was like 45 minutes ago, so I can't quite remember the original question. But a follow up for that is, so you started writing your individual track, critiques, and I followed that for many years. And so,
Hmm.
how did you get involved with meeting the band and being able to interview the band?
Oh, good question. How do I get backstage? um, Okay, so I've been writing, like I said, for something else reviews for I think 13 years, and in my own blog for probably 5 or 6 years. I don't know how long that's been. So the more you write about artists, the more you become known by their publicist, and the publicist will occasionally reach out and say, "Hey, this person's going to be in town. Would you like to interview with them, or would you like to come to a show?" And even if I have tickets to their show already, I'll say, "Sure, I'd like to meet them." And usually they'll say, "Well, do you want to meet them at backstage?" So that's really how I got to meet Toto. I was writing this Toto Tuesday column for Something Else Reviews, which was the impetus for this album, this book rather. And a band member reached out to me and said, "Hey, would you like to come back and just have a chat?" So I got to do that. I don't know. I'm not sure how many Toto shows I've been to. I've probably been to Toto. I've probably been to more Toto concerts than any other band. Toto, Steely Dan up there in Chicago. And you know my Chicago experience. You've been with some of those too with me.
Oh, yes. I've almost been trampled to death at a Chicago concert with you and by you.
The Chicago women are vicious. They will run you over if you stand in front of their bass player, Jason Shaw. Anyway, so that's how I got to know the individual band members and meet them and get invited to come backstage and then also to interview them. Now, the interesting thing is I have met Joseph Williams twice, talked to him a few times, never had a chance to interview him. And then there's some other band member. Well, those are really the principal band members. I've met and interviewed some of their sidemen. I've talked to Lenny Castro a few times, who was their percussionist, yeah, world famous percussionist. I've talked to Shem Von Schreck, who was their bass player in the early 2000s, I guess up to 2018, I think. And like you mentioned, Leland Sklar, talked to him a bunch of times. So I've met a bunch of the musicians, um, including some members of their current band who are touring with him now.
Oh, very interesting how you got invited backstage, which was very different than how you got invited backstage in your younger days.
We won't
That's a
talk
story
about
for
that.
another podcast.
This is a PG-13 podcast here.
Yeah, yeah. And let's see. And so, are there any other things that you think are kind of, that you want fans to know about the book or your writing process?
Yeah, Joe, thanks for the question. It is, again, it is a fan's view of the book. It's not supposed to be the definitive book on Toto. I think it's a pretty good book, if I do say so myself.
Yes.
I like the approach I took, but I'm a fan, which is why wrote it, and which is why I've been writing about the band for so long, and which is why I've enjoyed their concerts. I think the first concert I saw was in Philadelphia when I was living out that way, when they just started touring for their album. Gosh, I can't even remember the name of it now. Kingdom of Desire, and they added a new drummer, and Jeff Porcaro had just died. So that was early '90s. It's a book for fans by fans. I will continue to write about the band and continue to get interviews with them. And maybe it'll be an update one day and I'll add those 10 songs that I took out of the book. It is a love
That's
letter
for
from
the
me.
extended version of the books. That way you can make them buy it and then they will pay extra for the extra 10 missing songs, in it, and the other interviews that you could add, to it,
And
plus
also,
a transcript of this podcast, of course.
of course, and also the pictures, because every tour I've gone to, I've taken oodles of pictures of the band. I included a bunch of pictures from really the same era, but some really wonderful things. So it is a love letter to the band. I love the band. I hope people who read the book will enjoy the book as much as I enjoyed writing it. I do want to again thank Steve Porcaro, especially the late Michael Sherwood, because Michael died a few years ago, because he was extremely generous with his time. Steve Lukather, David Page as well. But I also want to thank Something Else Reviews for giving the opportunity to write about Toto all these years, and thank you and Vinicio Cifuentes. But you've always been a supporter of the podcast. You've been doing this, taking time out of your valuable summer to talk to me about a geek band that I love geeking out about. And you've always encouraged me to do things that I wouldn't normally do. So thank you.
Yeah, and I probably would say through you, I think Toto might be the band that I've seen most live. It's either that or Chicago.
Yeah.
And will you have any plans of compiling? You've also done writings on Steely Dan and Chicago. Is that in your future at all, or what are your next plans after this book comes out?
Oh man. So Chicago, what they have, how many albums? They have 40 some albums. There's no way I could tackle that.
Yes. Well, you can take out 10 songs if you'd like.
I could actually take out 10 albums and no one would notice. And my love affair for Chicago has actually waned, especially with the latest version of Chicago, where the band's nearly unrecognizable. With only three original members. Um, so 50 some years of Chicago, no. Steely Dan, I've given that a lot of thought. And my Steely Dan passion really waned after Walter Becker died. Um, I I always love Walter's creativity, so I will think about Steely Dan. The thing is, I've never met Walter Becker or Donald Fagen. I've met some of their players in their band and interviewed some of them for the podcast. So I don't know, Steely Dan maybe, but Chicago definitely not. I think I just need to move on to something. And one of the things you always used to challenge me on is getting to know new music and finding new music. So maybe I'll find something else to write about. Ozo Motley, I don't
That's, yes, I I do love Ozo Motley. Like when you say Ozo, I say Motley.
Motley.
That's basically what I remember from the concert, but it was a great memory.
All
Well,
right.
excellent. Let's see. I think that's all the questions I have for you today. But I will say that I love the book and the approach, and I hope everyone that is listening will go out and buy a copy and learn about the band Toto and also the great music they have produced over the years.
Oh, that too, but more importantly, buy the book. Buy the book on your digital platforms. And of course, for the Slang of Ages podcast, season 6, like, share, and subscribe. And Joe, I always appreciate having you on. It's always fun. I always learn something. And by the way, this summer, if David Gilmour comes to Chicago, I want to come up for that too.
Okay, I would definitely go there, with you. And I will definitely get a copy of the book, although I was planning to buy it just to use it as a coaster. But now that it's digital, I can't ruin my iPad, from reading it by putting a hot drink on it. So I will just have to buy it for the enjoyment of the book.
Well, great. Well, I'm going to turn off this recording. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.